Hi everyone, my name is Tara and I am a geek. I'm not insulting myself. The term geek has evolved a lot in recent years. Nowadays it's pretty much just means that you are really passionate about your interests and your activities. And you can pretty much be any kind of geek. Music, literature, video games, Star Wars, Harry Potter, even business. Personally, I am a sci-fi and fantasy geek. There we go. I go to conventions, genre conventions, and I co-founded one of these in 2012. I cosplay my favorite characters from TV shows and movies, along with some really awesome friends that I've met along the way. I read sci-fi and fantasy novels and comic books, and I watch and review shows like Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, and Arrow for a website. And I really, really enjoy these things. These are my passions. They're what I'm interested in. They're what I geek out about. But, there are three things that I want to talk about today. Despite the fact that geek culture has become almost mainstream, there is one part of it that's lagging behind the rest. So we're going to talk about how it became mainstream, the part that's lagging behind the rest, and what focusing on that and making some changes with it could do, not just within geek culture, but for society in general, I think. These days, a lot of these things have become so much more popular. Back in the day, let's say 20 years ago or so, being a geek was not cool. If you were considered a geek, you were probably considered an outcast, most likely bullied, simply because your interests were not mainstream. I know I used to hide my Star Wars extended universe novels inside notebooks when I read them during study hall in high school, because God forbid anybody see me reading them. But again, recent years, things have become a bit more popular. Star Wars is probably the earliest example, but nowadays we've got shows like Game of Thrones, which is the most pirated TV show, and Walking Dead, which is the most watched show on cable. These came from things that used to be just for geeks, the Song of Ice and Fire novel series and The Walking Dead originally having been a comic. So things have changed, things are evolving, but, with that there comes a lot of other issues. There's been an explosion in geek-themed websites, podcasts, blogs, subreddits, fandom communities online, and also conventions, genre conventions are springing up all around the world, and attendance to these is consistently growing. In the media, you've got a lot of famous geeks that are making it, There are characters in TV shows like Glee, Community, and Heroes. There are also geeks who are featured as themselves. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Anthony Bourdain, Bill Nye, John Green. I'm sure you guys know at least some of these names. And on top of that, some of the richest and most famous people in the world are geeks. If I were to mention Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, or Steve Jobs, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room knows at least one of them, probably all of them. We also have, geeks who became famous by playing characters from things that we love. Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Daniel Radcliffe. And then additionally, we've got people like George Takei and Will Wheaton, who parlayed roles on Star Trek into their own places in pop culture. And George Takei is super big on Facebook, and very funny, by the way. But if you notice something here, all the people I just mentioned are men. What's up with that? Are there no female geeks? Well, obviously that's not true, because I'm here. And I have a lot of female friends who love the same things I love. But what about famous female geeks? Ashley Eckstein, Felicia Day, Tina Fey. Out of those three, I would say Tina Fey is probably by far the most popular. But when I mention those three names, do you really think of them the way you think of Patrick Stewart or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs? Guessing the answer is no. So the fact that there really aren't that many famous female geeks is kind of an issue, but generally it's just an issue within geek culture that women are marginalized. And why is that? Well, I think we kind of have to go back in time a little bit and talk about self-definition, which is the process of understanding and defining who you are. This happens at a very young age, and it usually begins with 3 factors: education, marketing, and peers. In education, girls were often, told that we weren't supposed to be good at math and science. We weren't supposed to speak out in class, We weren't supposed to have strong opinions, and we weren't supposed to debate. Additionally, we were meant to be teachers or nurses or secretaries or mothers, whereas boys, they could be smart even if they weren't strong. We were kind of just supposed to be pretty. Things obviously have evolved a lot since then, and especially in the past 20 years. I think it's a lot different now than it was when I was in high school. But we also have marketing. Now in marketing, superheroes were marketed to boys, They weren't meant for girls. We were supposed to be into Barbie. We were supposed to be domesticated and beautiful. And on top of that, there really weren't many strong female characters for girls to grow up with. I mean, there was Leia in Star Wars in the late 70s and early 80s, and then we had Buffy and Xena in the 90s, but strong female characters, the fact that I can name 3 of them alongside hundreds of male superheroes is just sad. So that was an issue. But the thing is, despite that lack of strong female characters, women have always been into these things. We have always self-defined as lovers of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, just as we've always self-defined as lovers of math or science or computers. We've always had those interests, we just tended to hide them, and especially more so than men did. And long after men felt comfortable opening up about the fact that they liked these things, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago or so, we were still holding ourselves back. That brings us to our peers, because recently there have been a lot more women who have expressed interest in these things and been vocal about those interests. But our peers are still kind of not on the same level with us. We are called fake geek girls if we talk about our love for Game of Thrones. We are additionally just kind of, when it comes to men, they can go to a convention or walk around anywhere and wear a Captain America t-shirt or cosplay. And it's cool, it's almost expected, and they're praised for doing so, whereas you as a woman could go to a convention or be walking around the mall in the same t-shirt or in a costume, and you're going to be questioned and interrogated about your knowledge of these things. So not cool. There's also, despite the fact that conventions are taking a really harsh stance on it, there's still an issue with sexual harassment at them. And that's something that has also gotten a lot better recently, but the problem is still there. So in the end, why is all of this important? Well, as women have, become more open about our interests and become more vocal about these interests in geeky things, like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. We've also in real life, loved science and math and medicine, and we are becoming more open about that, and we are not being afraid to go to school for it, or to become doctors instead of nurses, to become entrepreneurs instead of secretaries. And because of that, it's just the mainstreaming of this geek culture. It goes along with the growth of women, in these industries. We are self-defining as these things. We're not afraid to self-define as either geeks or science lovers, either end of the spectrum anymore. So, with that, it's important to note that we should be proud of who we are. Everyone, I think, could self-define as some type of geek. If you think of the one thing you are most passionate about, I think you could probably say you're a geek over that, even if it's sports, I have a friend who will freely admit that he is a sports geek, a football geek, I think is specifically. So the point is, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. Marianne Williamson said that, and I think it's really important to remember, because not just women need to encourage each other to be open about these interests and these things, but we need the support from men as well, and I really just hope that everybody, embraces the things that they love and isn't afraid, to talk about them, to get up there and say, like, I love Star Wars, I love Lord of the Rings, I love Walking Dead, I love math, I love writing, I love science, I love music. You shouldn't be afraid to express your interests. You shouldn't be afraid of the things that you love. And if you're a woman and a geek, I really encourage you to accept that, to nurture it, to share it, because we're all waiting to see it. Thank you.